All right, it looks like we are up on YouTube, and I'm going to start the webinar here, so it'll start recording. This is, hello everyone. This is the final pre-election day session of our election discussion group at the Salem Center at McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas, Austin. We've had, I think, 5 of these already. This is the 6th. And probably will reconvene at least once after the election to talk about what happened and our impressions of it. We're in Texas, where there's been early voting for a few weeks now. Has everyone, not everyone's necessarily eligible to vote, but has everyone who's eligible and plans to vote voted already, or is anybody waiting for election day?
I voted.
No, you did. Carlos said last week he had voted. I voted. My wife and I voted on Monday. Chris also? So I think we've all kind of said in earlier episodes who we were intending to vote for. I voted for Biden on Monday. Carlos, you said you voted for Trump last week. Simil, I'm guessing Biden, given where you've been in our discussions. Chris, do you want to share that? I forget if you said before.
I don't know if I have said, but I voted for Biden.
So let me ask you a different question. How about senators?
Anyone?
I voted for MJ Hagar.
Yeah, I voted for Cornyn.
Greg?
I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I decided I didn't have a strong enough preference between them. Cornyn seemed about as good as a Republican as I was going to get, and the challenger, Hagar, seemed about as good a Democrat as we were going to get, and it sort of depends on who wins the presidency, who I want to have the Senate. So I decided to sit it out, and then I didn't know enough about the other local elections and the representative to vote, and it didn't seem worth the time investment to find out.
Yeah,
Can I ask what you guys live in? Are you guys in the 21st, 25th, the 10th?
I am Williams. So Julia Oliver is the my
The 25th. Roger Williams, Julia Oliver. Yeah. Okay. So it's Guad is the congressional district line. So West Campus, everything was Wendy Davis and Chip Roy, and then Roger Williams, Julia Oliver was the 25th.
Right. I can say that I have very positive impression of Chip Roy, and I have interacted with some of his legislative stuff before. Roger Williams, I'm not particularly a fan of, but was definitely not a fan of Julia Oliver either. And at this point, it's more like me hoping for divided government of anything else. I think my vote has been very much dictated by that. So,
I mean, I'm also overall hoping for divided government. And yet, I mean, this goes to issues of how we understand corruption and what's happening. I thought on the impeachment vote, Trump should have been impeached. And so I'm disinclined to vote for the Republicans who stood with him. On the other hand, I think, if a Republican is generally good enough, I'm not inclined to vote against him in a context where I'm not keen to have a Democratic Senate. And if the Democratic candidate were someone I really thought was bad, I would, vote for the Republican against it. So in this case, it just was close enough to even, I thought. Although I'm hoping for a big Biden win with the Republicans holding the Senate, which is not too likely. It's likely either a small win and the Democrats take the Senate, or a big win and, well, you know what I mean.
I think 538 calls the chance of a trifecta at like 73% right now.
Yeah,
because that's the chance of the Senate win. So if they win the Senate, they win everything.
And they're going to keep the House. So
right.
All right. So a couple of issues we should talk about, I put online to have in mind. One was we've never gotten to talking about foreign policy, and I would like to talk about that a bit. The other is an issue that you can think of from the one side as rule of law and from the other side as corruption. I mean, those go against one another insofar as people are making decisions and the government is functioning on corrupt motives of particular politicians, people bribing them, or nepotistic affairs or whatever it is. They're not functioning in an impartial way and therefore not following rule of law. So you can think of those issues as tied. There are or have been raised real concerns about this with both candidates, and we can talk about how plausible each one is. But you'll find a lot of people claiming, well, I'm voting for Trump because he's exposed the deep state and the swamp, and Biden's a swampy and his son and all this. My own view is that there's a much more reason to be concerned about this with Trump than with Biden, though it's not like I view Joe Biden as a man of sterling integrity either. So I just wanted to spend a little time, because we've not discussed it much here, talking about what are people's impressions of the two candidates with respect to this issue, and any thoughts on the particular scandals or allegations that have come out and how they were handled.
I can go first, I suppose. I am generally a person that doesn't hold politicians at a high regard, in terms of, it's almost part of the profession to be in the positions they are. It's really hard not to be, cutting deals throughout your life in ways that are oftentimes kind of gross. It's an unfortunate part of the business, is the sort of deal-making aspect of it. I have yet to meet a politician that doesn't end his life rich. Mm-hmm. So, whatever you want to say about any candidate in any side, like, if a lot of them had money ahead of time before joining politics, but all the ones that did not made an enormous amount of money by being in power without getting paid a lot of money in their salary. So it's like, you have, whatever. So whether you were talking about, I don't want to single out a party here, because that's true for both parties, right? So I think that's typical. Honestly, I think at least one of the things that makes me happy is that in the US, there seems to be a much smaller problem than in other democracies. That is true in democracies everywhere. The sort of like, the amount of power that a government have, and the amount of ability to cut deals, and the amount of like access that provides in terms of, there's no other reason why some people sit in boards, and why Michelle Obama sits in boards, not because of her expertise in business, it's because of her access, right? And that's something that is true all over the place, in local governments and all over the world as well. So I think the US, the sort of quid pro quo aspect of it is actually lower than in a lot of places. So that makes me happy. But it happens. So I'm realistic about that. So honestly, I don't see anything in this particular election that is like egregiously bad in any of the sides. I think they're both like, okay, I'm not learning anything new here. This is part of the business. I wish it was different, but the reality of the world is not that, it's easy.
So how do you understand the transaction when Hunter Biden or Michelle Obama or whatever relative of a Bush, or I expect we'll see it a lot more with the Trumps in businesses they've got nothing to do with coming up and so forth. When one of these people is on a board, what do you see as the transaction? Do you see it as their, the politicians are doing specific favors for them, or what are they being paid for?
I think it's access, is like the ability to call somebody to make a case. I think the value of that is enormous, right? The value of that, of being able to make your case to the president's office, to the chief of staff, and that's really, really valuable. And I think knowing the phone number of some people sometimes is incredibly powerful. And the CEO of Twitter can then call somebody, mm-hmm. Hey, no, this is not a good, whatever. That's the world works that way.
Yeah, that's how I understand it also. It's not that, Hunter Biden's invited to a board because there's a particular favor that Joe Biden's going to perform in exchange, but there'll be an introduction, there'll be a chance to plead a case. And it's a similar kind of thing, I think, to what people have expressed concern about with Mar-a-Lago. It seems like having a membership to Mar-a-Lago these days is an opportunity to, see the president or the people close to him and plead your case. And I find all of that on both sides unfortunate and gross, but it seems like that's been going on forever. And I'm not scandalized by Trump's got high-priced clients at Mar-a-Lago, or Hunter was on a board he wasn't qualified to be on, or any of these kinds of things. But there is a kind of corruption scandal that arises with both of, that allegations have been made about in both of these kind of administrations, that concerns me a lot more. And that's cases where there are concerns that prosecutions are being targeted for political reasons, or government investigations are being targeted for political reasons. And so we're seeing, I think, Trump more or less openly asking for this kind of thing when he's talking for asking Barr to open investigations into his opponents, even if those investigations were well predicated. I'm really concerned about public calls for it or the chance of lock her up to Hillary. Of course, Trump would defend his doing this by saying that, well, there were all these investigations into my campaign that were meant to harm me back in 2016, and there's what he calls
with knowledge of the White House. I mean, with knowledge of the White House.
Yeah. So how do we make sense of all of this? Is it a pox on both their houses? Both have been doing something wrong or bad here. Is only one side to blame? How do you guys think about this?
I can jump in here. So one thing I'd like to, I guess, clarify. I think what you said was right in that, neither party is of perfect integrity by any means. I think all of us can agree on that here. But I think there is a level of false equivalency. I think when Trump's going around equating his impeachment and I guess investigation or the Mueller probe, and he's equating that with what happened with the investigation into his campaign. I think, or I'm sorry, he's kind of saying that he's trying to lead investigations into voter fraud in California, saying that I lost the popular vote because of illegal immigrants casting ballots. I think that one side seems to be doing it more in this case, and it's not really the Republican Party; it's the Trump wing of the Republican Party. I think when people talked about the probes that went into Trump's campaign, I think when you look at the details of it, it was quite warranted. I think it was Carter Page and Michael Flynn and Papadopoulos, and they had foreign contacts with foreign governments as members of a campaign, and these warranted FISA warrants. And I think the Trump campaign's accusation that this was used for political purposes, that investigation wasn't made public, and it never became public by any means before the election. There was an active effort to make sure it wasn't political. So I kind of push back on the idea that both sides are doing it. I think prosecutions and investigations are necessary, and we shouldn't assume that they're coming through some sort of political move.
Any counterpoint to that? I very much agree with Simil on this particular case. There's, to me, the idea that the Crossfire Hurricane operation was some kind of political hit job on Trump. I think all of the evidence is soundly against that. It was an incredibly close election. People thought it wouldn't be as close as it would be, but it was incredibly close. There's all kinds of stuff that came out a month after the election that if it came out a week before the election, I think would have very likely swung it the other way. And if you're going to do a political hit job investigation on somebody, what's the point of doing it and keeping the ammo in the tank? In particular, if that's true, I love it. Email about the getting dirt on Clinton. The fact of Papadopoulos saying beforehand that there was going to be a dump of material, hack material, that kind of stuff could have come out beforehand if the people investigating it, were the type who wanted to leak it beforehand, and it didn't leak beforehand. And moreover, the Steele dossier, which I don't think was as much of the predication of the investigation as people say, but was very salacious, right? The Steele dossier, people were trying to leak, and it was going all over Washington beforehand, but none of the major newspapers published it beforehand. And I think if everybody were gunning for Trump and had no standards, that is, that we're willing to release, that is, if the investigators were just trying to tar him, and even if the newspapers were I do think the newspapers are slanted, but if they were, their mindset was, we'll publish anything that hurts Trump. If that stuff had come out right before the election, I think it would have made a difference. It certainly could have made a difference. And if they were trying to do everything they could to get him, there was no point to holding it until after the election. So I think there's really strong evidence against the idea that these things were kind of ginned up. There's a question more plausibly of whether there was more fuel than was warranted added to the fire after the election in an effort to somehow subvert his power or undercut him. But even there, I don't think that's true. And I have a kind of heuristic for thinking about these things, which I found useful, which is I try to put myself in the place of each of the people that we're thinking about and think about like, and what I mean by putting myself in the place is take on as many of their interests and beliefs as I think one reasonably can. And whatever legitimate or semi-legitimate values they espouse, and think, holding that, what things would I be prioritizing and how would I be acting? And if you try to do that with Comey or with Mueller or with Rosenstein or any of the other people, and I try to see like, what would I have done and what did they do? Often I think they made the wrong call, but they made the wrong call in a kind of intelligible way that sounds like this was a guy who was worried about preserving an appearance of objectivity or not over politicizing the process, and he stepped in it in some cases. I think Comey certainly did. But you can see what their motives are. And I don't find that there's a way to do that with Trump where you get a good read on it. I think if you take after the election, if I were in his place and I thought, the Democrats really hate me, a lot of people are out to get me. I've just won this very close election in an upset. There's been these allegations that have come out about Russia. I know they're false because I know I didn't do anything untoward, and maybe some people loosely affiliated with me. I don't know about that. But if you take what he was saying at the time, what would your priority have been? I mean, my priority would have been, how can I make sure that there's an investigation that the whole country can rely on? And how can I get together with people who I'm otherwise opposed to and say, we have our real differences, but it's important that we're one country here. We were under attack. Why don't we get together and come up with some protocol for who the investigators will be and whatever that we can all get behind, and then just shut up about it for a year until it comes out. And I don't think there was any attempt made to do that. It was politicized. It might have been politicized from the other side anyway, but it was politicized by the president from the start. And that I found really troubling and an example of not really taking the responsibility seriously of the office. But that said, there are still questions of, and sort of given my read on his character because of that and other things, I am not predisposed to give him the benefit of the doubt on other kinds of claims about honesty, integrity, and where he's making allegations about other people. But I don't know. I'm still, there are still.
And yet, there was like, a very careful and thorough investigation on everything, right? At the end of the day, I think we even with him making statements that were just unusual against the particular investigation of justice system, the justice system took its course and did what it needed to do, and we got to the place where we got, and the president got to be, investigated and impeached, and then voted against it. So all the process. So if you think about rule of law took place, and I don't think that there is a reason to think that this is more on one side or the other in terms of like stopping the rule of law. Like the notion of somebody that what I agree with you 100% is that he's definitely somebody that did not follow traditional norms in any way sense of the word, and that has been the case for the last 4 years, right? But in no ways that I think have been particularly consequential. That has led us to a very different, to any different outcome that I think it was necessary in some ways.
So my sense is the investigation reached, the right conclusion insofar as it went. Whether it ought to have looked into things it didn't, I don't know. But the conclusion was no positive evidence of the kind of coordination with Russia that would rise to the level of conspiracy. Not no evidence of coordination, but no evidence of coordination that would rise to the level of criminal conspiracy, and evidence of things that may or may not be obstruction of justice, depending on your judgment, and then the probe or Mueller declining to make a call on that, and Barr making a call. So I think that was a good conclusion to that, and I feel confident insofar as we can go in those findings. But I do think the kind of attack on the rule of law that I see is, and then we don't have much. We have the IG reports yet, which I found interesting. And I do think, Samuel, you said that there was grounds for a FISA warrant, and that's probably true. But I think we also found that what many of us had been worried about well before this, that the FISA process is pretty dicey, and lots of FISA warrants have problems in the applications. And what would you expect with a secret court giving out warrants for things? So I think we learned that there's reasons to be worried about this FISA process. But we had 2 attorney generals, it seems like, replaced because they wouldn't buck to, or rather one replaced, but another it seems like is going to be replaced in a second term because they're not sufficiently functioning like the president's advocate. And I think that if that becomes a norm, that happens all the time, I think that's really undermining to the rule of law. I'm very worried about there being yes men, and I'm very worried about the rhetoric of political prosecutions, even if they end up not happening. Because that really undermines our ability in foreign policy to oppose regimes that are doing that. It really undermines our ability to, and it undermines confidence in the judicial system and in the legal system. So I think that that's a big deal, and I think it's going to have a big impact on the country long term if it doesn't change.
So how would you square that with the sort of qualifications of all the people that have been appointed to be prosecutors and judges in the country? You might disagree with their philosophies, but I don't think anybody can point to Trump be nominating prosecutors and judges their utmost qualification for their jobs. I mean, so that would be something that if you want to go corrupt the system, you're going to put a bunch of bozos, in charge of the U.S. Attorney's Office across the country. That did not happen.
It didn't happen so first of all, there's the judges and there's the attorneys, right? Those are 2 different things.
So 2 different things, 2 sides of the aisle. And my point is that you had a politician as Attorney General first, and the second one was not a politician. And that's the one that, again, is not in, neither of them bucked the pressure that he was putting in.
Yeah.
And then the people that work for them, all the U.S. attorneys are, again, people of qualified folks, right? So I think I trust the system in a way that even though there's pressure from the top, which exists, the system is pretty independent.
I think that's.
Can I say
Go ahead,
something?
Joe.
Yeah. So I think, Carlos, I think maybe the core of our disagreement on this may be just, I think you believe in the institution, that the system is strong enough to withstand partisan pressure. I don't feel the same way. I think the level of partisanship in this country has created an environment where in the past, a president would be forced to do the right thing due to public pressure. But nowadays, maybe 5% of voters are undecided, and they don't feel that pressure. So they nominate or appoint super partisan inspector generals, super partisan attorney generals, and I mean these institutions are only as good as the people that serve them. And
that's exactly the point that I'm making. That's exactly the point that I'm making. I'm not. This one is like if the institutions, there's U.S. Attorney's Office, there's I don't know, hundreds maybe of them across the country, and those people are. You go look at their qualifications and their actions and the way the U.S. Attorney's Office work. It's I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever of politicization of that system. I mean, if anything, they have overreach because we give them too much power and things like that, but nothing that is partisan. It's a lot of it is just they like, and it's true in the courts as well. The courts have, again, philosophical ways in which judges are appointed. They have, but those are respectable and accomplished individuals that just think about the world different than you or me and whomever is nominated.
You're saying the district attorneys?
Yeah, I think the district attorneys and the attorney's office, the U.S. Attorney's Office across the country are respectable institutions that are worked, and well, and so are the courts. I think most federal courts are respectable institutions that have not shy away from their job so far. We have no indication they have.
And if we want to concretize that, I mean, so Barr, who there are complaints about, and I think are justified complaints, that he's been more partisan in the carrying out of his job than Sessions had been, and then he should have been. But he didn't, get some guy with a, MAGA tote bag, and that was all he did to investigate Operation Crossfire Hurricane, right? Durham is a, plausible person to conduct this kind of investigation, and the investigation didn't at least so far, hasn't come up with anything, or at least hasn't bowed to pressure to release things ahead of time. So it's not like you got a bunch of clowns just doing the master's political bidding. But there's still a question as to how long, like, institutions collapse, and there's a lot of good in the American legal system that resists corrosive attempts at politicizing it. But I don't think those attempts have no effect. I mean, so for example, a lot of prosecutors resigned over what happened in a number of them resigned over what happened in the case with Roger Stone. Other people are leaving. We're cycling through attorneys general, and I think they're getting worse in how they're doing their job. And likewise, other people in the administration. And there's the question of how long of this kind of environment, of these kinds of pressures, can the institution withstand? Granted, it can withstand some, and it's done better than many feared. But can it withstand another 4 years like this? Can it withstand another 8 years, another 16? At some point, it will become a bunch of hacks if there's not enough replenishing of the culture and the incentives against that. And the question is how long? And would what we would get under a Biden administration be better? Because if it's just another flavor of the same kind of pressures we're going to be getting from Biden, then that's no reason to prefer one candidate to the other. I think it would be better under a Biden administration, or less bad. But that's a judgment call.
Yeah, I love to kind of chime in here. I think one of the things I'd like to clarify is that, I think, Carlos, you made a good point in that a lot of these district attorneys are, qualified and, I guess, honorable people. But I think one big problem that I think we're not covering is that sometimes the actions they take aren't political or politicized, yet they're perceived to be politicized because the people that those actions affect accuse them of being political, even if they're not. So when the president of the United States all of a sudden just tweets things against special prosecutors, Republican special prosecutors at that, even if Robert Mueller had no intent whatsoever to make it a political investigation, even if I think the district attorney in the Southern District of New York, I'm sorry, not district attorney, whatever that position is, it's escaping me right now. Even if they had no intent to be political, if the president of the United States is accusing them of being political, it's going to be perceived that way.
Oh, and I'm not, and I, as I said in the beginning, I premised that by saying that I don't agree with his sort of antics associated with his issues, the sort of like whether it was direct intervention or attempt to intervene, attempt to sort of pressure and create political rhetoric around these things. I agree was inappropriate. I agree erodes institutions. I agree is something that goes in the wrong direction. And I also agree with Greg that it's hard to translate. If you look forward 4 years or another 4 years, this how. But my sort of like counterpoint to that is that while I agree that that's the case and his attitudes are inappropriate and not called for, I don't know how to square that with the fact that the people that have been appointed to be in those offices are actually super qualified people. He did not try to staff those offices and courts with bozos. That was not something that was attempted. So I think that's like I've seen that done in other, where I'm from, where there is like, actional attempts of changing the composition of where the work takes place to really undermine it. And that's that. Thankfully, that has not taken place in here. And then I would have been a lot more concerned about this issue that we're talking about today if that had been the case. So because that wasn't the case, I think that's where I'm like, yes, I don't like how he handled himself. I don't like the kind of pressure that he tried to put on the attorneys general and so on. But
here's a theory as to why, but it's not a hopeful theory as to why it hasn't been all bozos. He doesn't know enough bozos or where to find them, and so
that's good. Our country's safe. Then.
Well,
it's a supply and demand issue.
Exactly.
So he's relying on the kind of Republican establishment, right? So I mean, he was relying on the FedSoc to give him judge candidates, which I don't love everything about the FedSoc, but I think they're pretty good and better than a lot of the alternatives left or right that he could have gone to. And most, a lot of the judges who've been appointed I like, although I have problems with all of them also, but all the ones I know. And likewise, he was looking to, initially Rice Priebus and other kind of Republican Party operatives to suggest people to appoint to various offices. But as the party and the people who were advising him become more and more yes men and cronies, which is what I think has been happening over the last couple of years, the judgments that he's outsourcing, I worry will get worse and worse. And we'll see if that happens. But if it's, Tucker Carlson who's telling him who to appoint rather than Bryce Priebus, I think we're going to get different appointees. And if everyone knows who to go to get the president's ear about who to appoint, I worry it'll become more and more Bozo-like. And it's worth noting, some of the appointees have been Bozo-like. So particularly the judicial appointees, there were a number who Lindsey Graham pushed back against because they were, by Lindsey Graham's judgment, unqualified. And Lindsey Graham certainly partisan in one direction, so and siding with the president. So, and there are others that people criticize Graham for not having pushed back against. So some Bozo-y folks get in, but it's certainly not like a third world country yet in terms of who the people are.
But I think the key word there is yet, right? Because I think the long-term damage from the Trump administration is that he's now normalized through his narcissism that the loyalty is to him over country, right? And if not, then you'll be replaced. And the judges, yes, he's outsourced all of that. He's not actually choosing the judges and whatnot, right? But I think that's the real danger, is that it's not there yet. And how do we try and keep that from happening?
And I think
in that sense is pretty good. A Biden administration is going to be the opposite of that. He's going to be an incredibly weak president. So
right. Which is kind of what you want, right?
That is what I want. Yeah, anyway. But I mean, I'm hoping what would be really frightening is when there becomes a bipartisan consensus on doing away with these norms. So if you get some Democrat who's not just very leftist politically or very leftist ideologically, but also views the role of of everybody, including the judges and the whatever, as their goal is to their purpose is to advance his political agenda. If we see that coming from the other side, that would be really frightening. And I think there are people.
That already comes from the other side. Yeah, that already comes from the other side. I think the other side is, if you want to talk about undermining norms, I mean, the other side is just as guilty. We're talking about a party running, at least a group of people in the party openly campaigning for breaking a norm that's over 100 years old in our Supreme Court.
That is
a party, back in the court. You have a party that is openly campaigning to finish the filibuster, or something that, again, is, whether you like it or not, is a norm that's in place for a long time. So again, it's not like we have a party that nominates attorney general, not attorney generals, that tries to elect attorneys, district attorneys all over the place, including the one here in Austin, right? That is not somebody that's coming in from a member thinking about the judicial system. It's a political animal that tries to, suggest that our prosecutions have to have equity in racial composition. That's an incredibly crazy idea, but they're campaigning on that. It's a political statement that is like, radical and breaking with sort of norms of equitable application of justice. Mm-hmm. They openly campaign on that, and they're going to get elected. Our Travis County Attorney General, it's going to be attorney, whatever district attorney, is openly talking about that. So just think about that, what it means for a second, that the number of prosecutions have to equal a certain racial breakdown. It means that if for some reason, if you're not full in a certain bucket, you're going to have to go find white people to prosecute. That's unbelievably bad, right? But that's, again, I have a hard time agreeing that this undermining of these norms that are very important for our system comes disproportionately from one side.
Well, so if it's the specific norm of serving the will of the particular president, I think that we're seeing disproportionately from the right now.
The current administration.
But what I think it would look like if it was coming from the left, because they're less likely, given their particular makeup, to have a grand leader kind of version of it, would be something like very focused on class and race interests. And so what prosecution is about is achieving racial justice understood a certain way, and therefore, et cetera. And what we want in a prosecutor is somebody who ensures that when there's a case of a white cop shooting a black person, for example, who ensures that there's an indictment rather than who ensures that the thing is investigated properly and so forth, and make sure that there isn't not an indictment because of people being chummy with the police or whatever. So that would be what it would look like.
The whole
And-
notion of anti-racism, the notion that doesn't matter the process. We need to actively, if we need to go against the process or the norms, or if we need to be segregated in the opposite direction, is justifiable to achieve our goals. And that's something that to me is incredibly troublesome. And that is, again, it's not the majority, I don't say, of the Democratic Party, but that there's definitely a strong wing of that party that's behaving along those lines.
So go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask? There may be a strong wing of the Democratic Party that believes that. Do you think Joe Biden is part of that wing?
No, I don't. I absolutely don't. I agree with you.
Okay.
So that's why, this is why I raised this initially. That is, it's not like a fairy tale that you could get this coming from the executive, the presidential candidate on the left. And I think it's not quite to say it's a fortunate thing, but it's a good thing that we have an opposition candidate who is not, as far as I could tell, looking to advance the leftist version of this same problem right now. And I would be in a much more difficult position deciding who to vote for if I thought that that was. And I don't think it's true of Biden, and I don't think it's true of Harris. I think Harris is a pretty party institutional player who I think is kind of, similar to Biden, but comes from a more left-wing state. So when she sticks her finger out to see which way the wind is blowing, she's, gone to more left-leaning votes than Biden has, but seems to function in a pretty similar way politically, from what I can tell.
No, in that sense, I agree. And I, as I said in the beginning, right, I was a primary voter for Biden for exactly that reason, knowing that the Republicans, not particularly being happy with the current candidate in the Republican side, and I would much rather have that than the alternatives that were present in the primary, for sure. And so, yeah, I hope and pray that we get, the moderate that Biden seems to be campaigning in Pennsylvania right now. I hope that's what we get.
And what I'm hoping in particular is for an administration that prioritizes rebuilding institutional norms and maybe formalizing some things that have been only something like what happened after Nixon, where you got more oversight and transparency measures put in place. But we will see what we get on this. Let's shift to foreign policy now, because we've always said we were going to talk about it, and we haven't. What are people's views on both of these candidates with respect to foreign policy?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. As with many other areas, I don't know that the Trump campaign or presidency really has kind of a general stance on foreign policy, other than they're very big on Israel. I think primarily because it speaks to a certain part of their base. I don't know that that's necessarily because it's a priority for them. And I think the flip side is their general kind of approach to it thus far has been to beat down some of our allies on certain things, right? So there was it the UN or not the UN, but where other countries weren't kind of paying their fair share of it. Yeah, NATO and whatnot. And maybe I think there is like a little bit of credibility to that, but I think that they've pushed us more towards where we're starting to become kind of less of a world superpower and becoming more of like an outlier, and I think that's troublesome. Not to mention, I think Trump is kind of coddled up to certain world leaders that we don't necessarily want to. And I candidly, I don't know much about the Biden campaign's kind of stance on foreign policy, but I can say with the utmost confidence that it will probably be better.
Other takes?
So my foreign, again, I agree with the sense that there's not a very clear foreign policy strategy or like ideological sort of take coming in the last 4 years. I think there's very like specific transactions, right? Okay, in this situation, what do you do? In that situation, what do you do? And there were some real positive things. I think that the latest Middle East sort of like agreements have been somewhat useful for the future, and that's something to be celebrated. There's all sorts of issues with NATO and the way it costs us too much to be the police of the world, but also generates benefits. So again, it's a trade-off there, and I am, one side of me is very happy about the way, for example, Germany and France in particular have been better contributors of NATO lately. But on the other hand, I would prefer that to have been done in a much more less adversarial and whatever the statement. I mean, again, right? The statements are always real bad, and creates all sorts of bad relationships. I'm very disappointed, both at Obama and at Trump, on how they dealt with England and Brexit. I think that that's something that it's not our business. It's a matter of sovereignty on their own, but we had a responsibility and an obligation to be accepting their choices and opening our arms to their decisions as a sovereign nation. Like, okay, you guys decide to not be part of this thing, we'll be, helping you in that transition. If you decide to go back, we'll help. You are our longest allies here. So we are hand in hand in this. And again, the missed opportunity to be aggressive on open trade agreements with both the European Union and the UK in the situation, try to lead in that, I think is something that was very, very disappointing in my view. But I think, I would like to, it's hard for me to judge. I don't know specifics about the situation in Afghanistan, for example, and Iraq. Where are we right now? What are the decisions that could have been made that led us to a better position? And what it is that we need to do moving forward? It seems that there's a bit of a stalemate in those directions. That what is the plan right now? Should we draw everything from everywhere? Should we have more? It just seems, I don't know. I can't really evaluate neither what his foreign policy generally was versus what's coming ahead of us. In North Korea, another problem that nobody seems to be able to handle appropriately. And what is Joe Biden's plan on that? I don't know. Is it any different than it's just going to be different rhetoric? I agree with that. But does anybody have a plan on dealing with North Korea? Does anybody have a plan on dealing with China? Like a clear, strategic, laid down plan? Okay, here's our principle. Is any of those two people going to defend Taiwan if China does what I think eventually they would do? And I don't know.
Yeah, Carlos, can I say something a little bit here? So I would say I agree with you on the most part, is that there's not a clear differentiation between either candidate on some foreign policy issues. I think the reason for that is that past administrations have turned what would be solvable foreign policy issues into just complete quagmires. I would argue that that's the case in Iraq, that's the case in Afghanistan. I would even argue going back to I guess the Eisenhower Truman days that's the case in Iran, and so I think a lot of this is the fault of past administrations. I think the important thing is, so on a large scale, some of these stances are going to be very similar. I think I can pinpoint maybe a handful that are different. The first one is Iran and the Iran nuclear deal. So I believe Iran, since Trump revoked, I believe it's called J. It starts with a J. I don't know, but the Iran deal. I believe he's revoked that, and since then, Iran's basically developed the capabilities to develop a nuclear weapon much faster than they did in the Obama years. Once those sanctions were put back in place. So personally, I believe that a destabilized Middle East is a unsafer world. And if Iran has the means to obtain a nuclear weapon and they can do it faster, it leads to an unsafer world. So I think that's one issue where I'd love to hear your thoughts on that deal. And
I agree with you that an unsafe a world with Iran with a nuclear weapon is a world that's unsafe. Is a world that Israel is not going to accept, and they said so openly, and they will take actions, right? And here's a situation where I kind of trust Israel's judgment on it. Because their lives at stake, not ours, in that situation. And Israel was very clear from the beginning that the Iran deal was unacceptable. Was something that, again, and I don't know, I don't know details. I don't know exactly the specifics here, but I sort of trust the judgment from Israel. Israel was very unhappy with the Iran deal, and was something that I think made them put them on a path of danger that they openly said, well, we have to take action ourselves. And so that got walked back, right? So somehow they think that this, even though you say that they are closer to capability, somehow the Israelis are happier. So, I don't know.
I'm a little confused just because, I think, Israel may have its own motives at play here, for their own, in terms of just, I guess, political power and economic power within the region. I think a key aspect of the deal was that in exchange for, Iran not developing a nuclear weapon, the United States and all these other countries would remove sanctions. So, is this really about keeping Israel safe? I think Iran's actually on a faster track to nuclear weapon. The reason that Israel was so against the deal was because that it removed those sanctions, and in essence, Israel was losing economic power within the region. Do you think that may have played a role?
I don't see. I mean, in any way, I think honestly, I would say that if a richer Iran is good for Israel, the region.
To be honest,
also, I wish we had a world. I mean, and again, it's really unfortunate because Iran is a big country, a country with a lot of potential, a lot of interesting people, interesting culture, and so on. And I think that the Ayatollahs and their system is again, it's a dictatorial minority that takes over the whole country, and there's a lot of unhappiness internally, right? And I think we don't lead in any way that has helped the minority, the majority take control of their country. And I don't know how, and I don't know whether that deal originally was a deal that maybe had the hopes of, like, by removing sanctions, by letting them grow somehow, is almost like the sort of like a notion that, naturally, empower the citizens to somehow move forward. I just don't know the specifics. And I think the Israeli considerations, I think, is very much a consideration that on strategic safety stuff. And
it's very hard to see how Iran's getting richer would harm Israel in any way other than them having more money to contribute to people who want to kill Israelis. And a lot of money comes from Iran to funding terrorism. It's not like Iran is in some business that's competing with the Israelis. It's in the oil business, and it's competing with Saudi Arabia and with all these other, the Emirates and so forth. But it's not like it's, big into biotech or any of the things that are big.
Israel's very powerful one, right?
So
does anybody know why in particular Israel opposed the deal? I mean, I guess by their judgment, Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon, but why did they think that?
I think the deal relaxed a lot of the by not having the sanctions. There was the way the oversight was set up for the deal. I think there was a lot of folks that were more hawkish foreign policy people thought that the deal was too dovish on the Iranians, so letting them off the hook too much.
I mean, I'm opposed to the deal, and I can tell you why I am, but I don't know if and the Israelis.
That was my understanding, at least, right? All the hawks were against the deal, right? So
the Israelis are not one person, so there's going to be differences of opinion, of course, within Israel, just as there is here. But I should say first, I think we shouldn't have been in that deal in the first place. I don't think it follows from that Trump's decisions with respect to it are necessarily the right ones. My sense is most of the damage of the deal was done already, and withdrawing from it, I'm not sure that we got anything back that would have helped us. So I don't know that I don't have an opinion as to whether that was the right move on his part, but my general view is the same. We shouldn't have gotten into the Iran deal for the same reason that Trump shouldn't have negotiated with Kim Jong-il in the first place and tried to make a deal with North Korea. When you have people who are dictatorial regimes that are funding attacks against you or your allies, in the case of Iran, you can't trust them to do their part of the deal. And I think there's just deals with those kinds of regimes are not worth the paper they're written on. We have North Korea has atomic weapons now because of decades and decades of making these kind of deals and so forth and kicking the can down the road. There was a deal that Clinton signed and this kind of, but it's not just, I mean, the Republicans too. It's just, this is how we deal with these countries. You can't make agreements with people who are your enemies. And I think we have to, in light of Iran's history with respect to the US and its allies, regard it essentially as an enemy nation, and deals with enemy nations, I don't think can be trusted unless they're kind of surrender deals. So I think we should just be on a footing of, we don't trust Iran, we don't trade with Iran, we have embargoes against Iran. and just treat them that way until there's regime change. We don't have to go in and force the regime change necessarily, but just I think they need to be written off by the free world until there's significant change there. So that's my take on it, but that's,
But would you say that's true also for the Soviet Union back in the day?
Yeah, and we did.
We dealt with them like continuously. We made very successful deals with them that led to a lot of stabilization of the world, right?
Well, did it? I mean, so
we dealt with like stop the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. We dealt with like non-proliferation agreements that were successful.
When are we talking about from, right? So we had after World War II in dealing with them, we let half the world fall into Soviet tyranny. Yeah. It's not clear that that would have happened if we handled post-World War II foreign policy differently. Now, when you're into 1974 or something, and should we have had glasnost, or 1980, we've already made a lot of wrong turns, I think, with the USSR. I mean, I don't think we should have been in the UN. I think the idea of forming a UN with Stalin on the Security Committee is a travesty to justice. And so I think it was basically a gift to the Soviets for, decades. I hold the policy with all of these places, but what we should have done, having made that mistake already with Russia is a harder question. And I think it's a harder question with Iran and North Korea. But I think the bit of it that I don't think is hard is that we should see real signs of change away from nuclear ambition or territorial or whatever kinds of ambitions we're concerned about with these countries before we yield to talks. And I think that's I don't think we had enough of that with Iran, and we certainly didn't have any of it with North Korea. We got nothing except we got some remains of soldiers back and a few other things that are nice but basically symbolic from the North Korea.
I think that's the issue that I have with all of this. I think if you were to lay down a principle and say, I don't talk to these regimes, period, maybe then you would say, oh, Nixon, don't go to China. And I think the counterfactual of that is incredibly expensive, right? For like 1 billion people. And so I have a different take on it where my sort of preferred way to do it is like, I wouldn't put economic sanction on anybody. I would always open my borders for trade and say, listen, I'll buy your stuff, buy my stuff. I don't care. But listen, do something wrong, I'll obliterate you. And that's the thing that's sort of like credible commitment of like a strong country that live by the principles of liberty and say, don't break those principles. If you do, I'll act on it. But we're not committed. We're not committed to those principles in a way that's clear. And we make those mistakes all the time by making a deal with the Chinese for trades, but then try and put sanctions on the Iran. It's like, well, what the hell? These guys are not particularly good either, right? So it becomes ad hoc, and that's the problem.
You don't need to have talks to open trade, right? You
true.
could have opened trade with China and not had Nixon go there. Right. And I don't think that we should have had a trade embargo against China. I don't think China was a military threat in the way the USSR was. As to whether Nixon's trip to China helped, I mean, it's a hard counterfactual because Mao also died shortly thereafter. So is the turnaround in China the result of opening things up, or is it the result of Deng Xiaoping? How do you say his name? The successor to Mao being better than Mao. That's a real question. But I don't think we should have had an embargo against China in the way I think we should have against the USSR. I agree with that there's no coherent foreign policy from Trump or from Biden, but I don't think there's been a really coherent foreign policy since at least World War II. I think we've been a mess, and this is, Carlos, I think the same point you're making. So is there a real change with Trump? I think there are some changes with Trump. A small one that seems to me for the better, and a big one that seems to me for the worse. I think he's been ready to be bolder with respect to the alliance with Israel, which I regard as a good thing, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. I think some of his moves there have had some effect on these new recognition deals that have been struck between Israel and some of the countries in the area, though I think the primary reason for those deals is that we failed at containing Iran. And so as Iran gets more powerful, other countries look to need alliances with Israel. So I think it's the fault of both Obama and Trump not succeeding on Iran that bad things have happened that have led to this good thing as a kind of silver lining. But the bigger change, I think, with Trump is having a more mercantilistic and anti-trade dominating view of foreign policies. If you think about the NATO issue, it's not clear to me that we should even be in NATO. But the reason that we shouldn't be in NATO, if we shouldn't be in NATO, if we should change it, isn't about dollars and cents. Either we have a security interest in helping to defend Western Europe, or we don't have a security interest in helping to defend Western Europe. And if we do, we should be there, and then we can negotiate the dollars and cents of it. And is it worth it if Germany pays less, or should they pay more? But that's a fairly minor issue relative to, like, do we have a security interest in containing Russia or not? And if we do, we should be there, and we shouldn't be begrudging having to pay for it because it's in our own interest to do it. And, we should encourage Germany to pay more too, maybe. But making the relationship contingent primarily, making it about money primarily, and about who's paying for what, it's unprincipled, and it detaches it from the real security interests of America in a world in which Russia is less dominant or not. And if you think about it with China, I think it's been a catastrophe with China. So there are this fiction that where it's some trade disadvantage from China, and we have a trade deficit, and that's a horror and so forth, so we have to stop trading with them. I don't think there's a real issue there. I don't think there's any problem with trade for them, except insofar as there are IP or military issues. But just trade deficits, I don't think is a real issue. And that is what dominates Trump's thinking about it. In the meantime, what ought to dominate our thinking about China is human rights and national security issues. So what's going on between China and Taiwan? And what are we encouraging? And what kinds of behavior are we? What's going on between China and Hong Kong, especially? What's the safety of these people? And if you have someone who's generally pro-trade or agnostic on trade, they'll maybe see trade sanctions as a way to, we want to have free trade, but China's doing something terrible to the Uyghurs, and they're doing something terrible to Hong Kong. So as a cudgel to try to stop that, we'll try to use trade. But Trump, I think, is the opposite. He doesn't care at all what happens to Hong Kong or the Uyghurs or to Taiwan or any of that. He doesn't show any actual interest in it. In fact, according to Bolton, he cheered them on with respect to what they were doing to the Uyghurs. And there's no reason I think he would, be opposed to, given his own leanings, that he has any issues with what they're doing in Hong Kong. It seems to me he uses those issues and humanitarian concerns about those issues and rights-based concerns about those issues solely as a cudgel to get better trade deals, or what he regards as better trade deals, which aren't actually, I think, in our interest. So insofar as what all the people are going to compromise on security stuff with China because they want the trade. But Trump, I think, has the hierarchy of this inverted. That is, he doesn't want there to be trade, and he's willing, or he doesn't want them to be selling us stuff. And so he's willing to, deal with, to say mean things about their human rights violations if he thinks that'll help him build up a coalition or whatever, or have an excuse to have harsher trade policies, which is, I think, exactly the reverse of what we want. We want a world in which we have open trade with China, and we're doing whatever we can in that context to stop persecution of the Uyghurs, to protect, which might be boycott or something, to protect Taiwan and Hong Kong. And I think that inversion, that kind of mercantilist thinking is really troubling. And I think we see that in other areas too. So that flip of priority and flip of kind of the hierarchy of values there, I think it's not like it's never been there, but it's new and more extreme with Trump. And I worry about that, particularly with respect to China. And I suspect, although I don't know any way to prove this, that a Trump presidency has made China more aggressive on these kinds of issues than they would have been without one. But I don't, there's not a counterfact. We can't run the tape back and have the other world where we can see that.
So I have a question. I agree whatever you say about China, about Trump policy to China, but do you think Biden will flip that motivation back to normal? Not to normal, flip it back.
I think there's a chance. I mean, so I don't think Biden has taken on a lot of this America First trade rhetoric from Trump, which I think is bad. But I think he's me tooing Trump about, I think if it was popular to be pro-free trade like it was 20 years ago, and when he was more pro-free trade, he would have been more pro-free trade. So I don't think this issue matters to him, the trade issue. Whereas I think it is the one issue that really matters to Trump. It's the one thing, if you look at him, what he was saying back in the 80s when he thought Japan was screwing us. And then, what he's always been is about worried that other people were screwing us on trade. So that's the one issue that I think is kind of central to Trump's foreign policy thinking. It's an issue on which Biden has come over more to the Trump side, unfortunately, but I don't think it's what drives the guy. And I don't think so. And I do think he's more concerned. I mean, I can't imagine a story coming out where Biden in a private conversation is cheering Xi on about, constructing concentration camps. Whereas, that allegedly happened according to Bolton and is what you would expect to happen from Trump, given the kind of things he says publicly.
Yeah, actually, all my friends from Taiwan and Hong Kong, they're celebrating Hunter Biden scandal. They suddenly, my Facebook was flooded with the QAnon conspiracy only in Chinese, and everybody, my friends in Hong Kong and Taiwan, they're super, super liberal. They support LGBTQ. They're doing everything that a Californian would do in Taiwan and in Hong Kong, but they're all Trump supporters because they think Donald Trump is the only one who can contain China, and even through war. I think they all believe that Donald Trump is the only person who can protect Hong Kong and Taiwan from China. It's really interesting because what I read on my Facebook every day is Hunter Biden's new updates, and no one is talking about it here. That is very interesting.
I mean, I don't buy it about Trump containing China. I think they've been more aggressive under him than they've been under any of his predecessors. And I think if Trump could get China to commit to buy twice as many soybeans from some state that's got a lot of soybeans, I think he'd be happy to have them murder everyone.
Yeah, the problem if Joe Biden can make China to buy twice as the soybeans, Joe Biden will continue to contain China as Donald Trump is doing now. I mean, because I think Democrats don't really have a good record of containing China. Democrats try to make friends with China, and right now they just make China even stronger.
I mean, no one has a good record with China, unfortunately. And the record is one of really wanting the market and capitulating.
Can I say something here? I think we don't always, talk about these policies or these issues through this lens in these groups. But what motivates both of these candidates, I think, Greg, you said that Biden's become more on this anti-trade message. What motivates them is electoral politics. I follow the elections side of things a lot, very closely. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. These are the swing states in these elections, and these are the areas where trade is disproportionate. The negatives of trade have disproportionately been located here. So I mean, it's pretty much, I think, 80% electoral politics. That's why it matters to them.
Yeah, so they're just going to do whatever is popular.
Yeah.
At the moment. Yes. So that's what I'm worrying about is what if it's not popular one day? That it's like the fate of Taiwan and Hong Kong right now is at the swing states of America, at the hands of the swing states now. And so my question is, will Joe Biden will uphold like the flag of human rights, will continue to contain China on Uyghurs, on the issue of Uyghurs, on Hong Kong, on Taiwan? Because people are thinking that as one rhetoric is very, very popular right now across Hong Kong and Taiwan, is that if Joe Biden win, and people assume that Joe Biden will go easy on China, and the few months before Joe Biden inauguration, the Eagle Republicans will go even harder on China, and will force China to react. And everybody right now in Taiwan is talking about war, because right now in China everything is going crazy. It's like going back to the Cultural Revolution, but only in a digital 1984 version. So a war is really very much likely right now from what's happening in China and in Taiwan. And Donald Trump is continuing selling weapons to Taiwan. And the president of Taiwan is getting harder on China. So everybody's talking about a war before the inauguration. So do you think that will affect the election, or do you think that would, if the war doesn't happen or does happen, do you think that it will change after Joe Biden or Donald Trump get elected?
Oh my God, I mean, I haven't had nightmares lately, but boy, that would be a nightmare scenario. Can you imagine China invades Taiwan like after Biden gets elected? What a shit show. That would be real bad.
People have been talking about it for a year.
I understand the Taiwanese fears, but like, oh my God, I cannot draw a worst case scenario coming up. It would be pretty bad.
It would be bad.
Can you imagine have a transition in the middle, like a confrontation with China? Boy. Oof.
Yeah, it's bad. That's why it's good for China. It's bad for America. So it's going to be China one of the best decisions China can make, right? If Donald Trump keep pushing China in the last few months of his administration, he lost the election. He had a few months left. God knows what's he going to do.
I mean, I think this whole idea of hard on China is what Ayn Rand called a package deal. That is putting things together that don't belong together.
Yeah.
That don't have anything in common. Putting tariffs on Chinese goods in the hopes that they'll lower tariffs on your goods is a very different thing than selling, jet planes to Taiwan. Those don't belong together. They're not the same sort of thing. Being hard on them militarily with security issues in an attempt to achieve a self-defense or defense of allies goal is a very different thing than driving a hard bargain in a trade negotiation. And I think one of the things that's become really problematic is these things have gotten lumped together, and the security considerations have been like the dog that's being wagged by the tail of the trade considerations. Where it should be exactly the other way around. We should be concerned primarily about the security issues with them. We should be trying to have as free trade as possible. And we should be, in my view, restricting trade only if it's necessary for security reasons. And then it should be by embargoes and things, not by you make steel 2 cents more expensive or whatever, which is not really a security measure. It's a kind of attempt to central plan the world economy. So I think that this has gone flipped in a really dangerous way. I don't think it'll flip back under Trump. Will it flip back under Biden? Probably not, but I think there's more chance of more prioritizing of the security concerns and less of misguided economic concerns, I think, under Biden. Because I think the misguided economic concerns are kind of core to who Trump is, whereas they're political opportunism for Biden. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think China doesn't really care about the security, about America being hard on China in terms of security. They only care about the trade. And
they care about whether we defend Taiwan if they invaded it, I assume, and they care about things like that.
Yeah, they do. So let me ask you a question. Do you think the American trade with China previously in the past 10 years or 20 years is free trade?
I'm
very close to.
But if but any foreign company in China, if they want to grow business, there are a lot of restrictions. You have to.
Sure. You have to give favors to the Chinese, sure. But
yeah, you need to give your skills, your patents, and everything to Chinese, and people can use American website in China. People can use American software, can use American app in China, but in America we can use everything from China. So I wouldn't call it like fair. But
I agree with you, it's not fair for sure. I mean, we're a lot softer on them than they are on us on a lot of restrictions. But it's not a trade that's full of. I mean, that's a kind of a tariff. You're right, but it's not. It's not there's a regulatory tariffs, right? So we have generally a pretty, which we have in some other dimensions as well here for like agricultural products, for example, and so on. But it's pretty open trade. I think generally, I think our ability to build factories to make things in China, American companies, a lot of them, I mean, have like giant, producing facilities in China and so on, and move those goods freely around the world. And it's been pretty open. I mean, not as free as I would like, but definitely pretty open.
Yeah, but I think that caused China to use trade with America as a weapon to contain America, because America has a lot of leverage on China, but China doesn't have a lot of. The American market is not that open to China, actually. No.
The other way around.
Yeah, the other way around. So what I mean is that China can hold Americans' interest in China to threat America, right? That's what they've been doing in the past maybe 10 years, in the past 5 years, especially on Hong Kong and Taiwan.
And certainly have been doing it with respect to particular corporations. If you think about the MDA being afraid to have people speak out against what the Chinese government is doing and so forth.
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe, do you think that will change when maybe Biden become president? They have to force China, for example, to open up to use Google, right? So do you think that will change? It's because you mentioned motivation. So if your motivation is to have like a completely, nearly absolute free trade or fair trade, do you think China should open up to American as well? So do you think America should force China to do that at least?
Well, what would force them mean? I mean, I think every country ought to open up its trade to every other country, and every country would be better off doing it, even if the other ones don't reciprocate. Taxing your own people when they buy things from China doesn't hurt China so much as it hurts your own people. And likewise, if China taxes people when they buy things from us or doesn't let them buy things from us. So I think, it's in each country's interest to free up its imports and exports and encourage other countries to do the same, but to do it even if the other countries don't. But when you say force, what would mean force? Like we're going to bomb them unless they drop tariffs, or we're going to tax our own people if they want to buy things from China unless China stops taxing their people if they want to buy things from us. I don't think either of those two things we should do. But
by force, I mean that if China want to do business with America, they have to open up their market wider than it was before.
Yeah,
They have to reform their like a financial system. They have to reform the information system, like that.
I'm with Greg on this one. Generally, it's just like, you guys do what you want in China. I mean, I'll buy your stuff. I don't care. I mean, I'm not gonna, that's the problem of the people of China to solve, how they want to have their financial system, how they want to have their information, if they want to have restrictions on the products and goods they can have from the US and so on. It's not on us to enforce it. I think on us is just to lay down some clear markers on, like, for example, don't mess with Taiwan. And now the problem is that the credible commitment might be difficult to enforce there.
Yeah, I think that's because China is using the trade as a weapon to threaten America. When you draw a clear line that don't mess with Taiwan, China has all the interest from American company, even American government, that the line is not that clear. So I think that's not the motivation of Donald Trump. But what I think is Donald Trump is using trade as a weapon to go against China. It does work. It hurts China. Like military threats or that clear line, China doesn't care about that. The government of China only care about like interest. They only care about money. They only care as long as they can do trade, even if it's not fair.
Trade as a weapon about them to get. Is he using trade as a weapon against them to, if you want to call it using it as a weapon against them, to get security, some actual security related measure passed, or is he using it to change the trade terms? I think he's only interested in the trade terms, and so I don't see it as helping. But there's just so many.
Have to go, unfortunately.
Now we're well over time when we said we'd stop. We said we'd stop 15 minutes ago. Okay, so I think we're all agreed the situation with China is ominous and worrying, and we're not too optimistic about it under either of these guys. Some of us think Trump's worse. Some of us think they're the same, and maybe some think Biden's worse. And certainly, apparently, people in Taiwan think Biden would be worse. So that's an interesting thing to learn. Okay, well, we will reconvene at some point after the election, and we'll see what happens.
Are we doing it like immediately after, or wait a couple weeks?
I don't know. I mean, it might be there's rioting in the streets and we're all unsafe right after the election. I hope
Only if Trump wins. The right's not going to riot. Don't worry. If there's riots, it's because Trump won.
Walmart pulled all their guns and ammunition, so we don't have to worry about that, right?
Oh, well, then we're fine. Or else we haven't stocked up soon enough, depending. Yeah, I can't do this time next Friday, I don't think, but let's email around about when we'll do it. I hope soon after, just to reflect.
We can do 2 weeks from now. That'd be great.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Sounds good.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.